Hi, and welcome to Truth Shall Come Forth. This is the first episode, episode 1A, in the Sacred and Spiritual Records podcast series. We will be doing an introduction and an overview to all of the records. Part A, we'll be discussing how these various records have come to us. It's important to know that. Once again, this is the Truth Shall Come Forth channel. Please like, subscribe, and share for updates and future episodes. My name is Joseph Abreu, and if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do so at truthshallcomeforth@gmail.com. And we'll be discussing today how the records come to us. This is the first in the podcast series, and this series, Sacred and Spiritual Records, is designed for everyone. There are literally hundreds of records that are available to us today. And because of that, I want to make sure that each record has its own understanding. You can find it easily and whatnot. So I'd like to give each record a slot, which is why I did the numbering system the way I've done it, knowing that there's over 100 records that we have at our fingertips. I need to have at least 100 in order just to separate them and be able to give you the opportunity to go straight to those individually. I'd like to discuss each one and tell you a little bit about it so that you know where you want to start your journey as far as reading and understanding. If it's only available in book, I'll let you know that. If it's available in an audio book, or there's video options, or there's people who have done other videos on that it's available, I'll let you know, because sometimes that's a faster way to get all the information. I personally do a lot of audiobooks if they're available. I can do two things at the same time. I can listen to them while I'm driving or while I'm working, and I can listen to them two or three times because I'm not paying maybe quite as much attention. But by the time I've listened to it the second or third time, I think I've done as good as if I had just sat down and read the book, and it didn't take me as much time. On some of these, I will post spoiler alerts where they apply. A lot of people don't like reading and would prefer instead to be taught. There's been a handful of people where I've shared the records with, and a year, 2 years, 3 years later, the only thing they know is what I've shared with them. So that's part two of, or another part of why I am creating this video series, is so that people who have that tendency, they just don't want to sit down and read, but they do want to get the information, they can do so. They can get a good overview of the book. So sometimes I may take a book and explain it further, but I'll post spoiler alerts so that hey, if I'm going to disclose things here, it's not going to be the same if you read it for the first time. I'm gonna put out all the information. There's going to be several podcast series that we're creating. The first one, Sacred and Spiritual Records, that's this one. It's not the first one that I began, but it's kind of where a lot of people probably should start. Another one that we're going to create is called Truth of God. There's a third one, Correcting Mormon Doctrine. Fourth one will be Red Pill Truth for ex-Mormons, people that have come out of the church, figured out that things are not quite the way they should be, but have tendency to have thrown everything in the garbage. Well, let's go figure out what belongs in the garbage and what doesn't. And then the last one will be Timelines and Prophecies. There's a lot of information about the last days, not just from Revelation or Daniel with Ezra's eagle, but there's a lot of information time-wise that has come through us through these new records. And there's so many records, and trying to put that all together, I'm going to try to do that for you. So these are some of my absolute favorite records. There are so much information in these. This is kind of where, if people ask me, where should I start? Well, this is where I think is a good place to start. But even more so just than showing you these books or these covers and saying, hey, go read them, I want you to know what they're about, a little bit of an overview. And then for those that don't read, we'll explode into those further and do a spoiler alert, let you know everything that goes on in those records, or at least the important things. So as I discussed earlier, this first video, part A, we're discussing how these records come to us. And there's various methods by which we receive these records. Sometimes we get a record and it's translated from one language to another. Sometimes we get a firsthand account, like an eyewitness, that we have the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, that type of thing. There's channeling or going upon the way. And there's also record translation through Urim and Thummim. I'll be discussing what that is. There's word translation through the use of seer stones, what that is. You can focus and concentrate and get a word translation. And we'll be discussing the records that have come that way. Then we also have dreams and we have visions. So we're discussing all these things today and giving you a better idea of how this stuff interrelates. But when you understand how a record came, sometimes you can understand the the why it reads a certain way, or where we should put our emphasis on things. So first thing we'll be discussing is translating from one language to another. Now these are four great examples of books that have been translated from one language to another. The Old Testament, there were 776 complete translations into additional languages for the Old Testament. And if you're looking at partial translations, we've got over 1,000 languages that the Old Testament has been translated into. Now you've got the New Testament. And those numbers are 1798. That's a lot of languages. I didn't even know there was this many languages. But there's 1,798 full versions into different languages that the New Testament has been translated, and 3,700 partial translations. I didn't even know there's 2,000 languages, and now there's got to be over 4,000 languages or so if there's 3,700 partial translations. The Book of Mormon, it's relatively in a small number of languages. It started out in English and it's translated into these other languages. 115 languages, 136 partial languages, and then you have the Torah translated into even fewer. It's translated into 70 languages. Now, whenever you're translating a record, you need to understand both languages really well in order to be able to convert the meaning from one language into another. Uh, Particularly in English, there's a lot of times where you could use several different words, but being able to deliver the proper meaning, convey the proper meaning of what the author was writing, what was being said, what was being taught, it really takes somebody that understands the language completely to know which words to select. Sometimes these are based on context and whatnot. And then there's also, though actually there's also here's more books that are translated from one language to another. Now you may or may not be aware of the Indians, the Native Americans. Well, there's from the tip of down south of South America, the very southern tip, all the way up to the top of North America, where you've got Canada, Alaska, all of that. All of the Indians are connected. All of them are in one big tribe. We used to think that they weren't really in connection with each other, and that's a fallacy. They have meetings, they get together, they have councils, and beginning in 2025 at the spring equinox, the Native Americans announced that they would be releasing all of their sacred and spiritual records. At that time, we were told there were 55 or more that were going to be coming to us, and that number has risen as time has gone on. Some of these are short records, some of these are long records. At this point, we have 11 records. The bottom row, the left side, the left three, there's a white book, a black book, and a red book. Those are actually all the same record. I've put them up there so that you can know and you recognize what it is, but all three of those are the same. Everything else is its own separate record. These are the ones that have been released at this point in book form. This is the beginning of 2026. We're in January. And so all of these records are out there for us. These aren't it, but these have been translated from one language to another. So to give you an idea, the languages that they were written in, they've already been translated once. So many of these came in ancient Egyptian or were written in a different language before. And the ones that particularly the Ojibwe and the Ottawa and Potano tribes, which is up at the Medewiwin area, they have been translated into Anishinaabe. So they've been translated from a parent language that they were originally written in into um, Anishinaabe, and then now they're being translated from Anishinaabe into English. So it's a second generation translation. But because they understand both languages, they understand Anishinaabe, they still speak that language. Obviously they speak English. They're able to convert them from one to another and still convey the correct meaning. There are translations that go from one language to another that don't go so well. Um, this particular book we'll be discussing channeling next or later, but it was originally channeled into Portuguese. And then I'm told that Google translation was used to translate it into English. And so we have a Portuguese version, the black version, we have the English version, the yellow book, and you open it up and you kind of get a smile on your face because you're like, this is the tooth edition, the 2th edition. You kind of understand what happened. You're like, okay, it's not first, not second, not third, but fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. Okay, I understand how they got the th in there, but obviously they don't have a complete understanding, however this was translated, to get it into English if they're going to write down tooth, 2th. So if the meaning or is not always preserved, we got a problem. And then there's also like, the understanding of, hey, who did this? How was this done? What's going on? So the particular book that's called the Seal Book, I had a hard time getting an understanding of it. And I love this guy. This guy's Zachary Edwards. He and I met on Facebook. We were talking in a group or something, and he's like, "Have you read this book?" I'm like, "Hey, have you read this book?" And so he's like, "No, like tell me more about it." And he read that book, and then as he started reading that one, he's like, "Hey, what other books are out there that I'm not aware of?" And I said, "Well, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one." And he gets a lot of his information from dreams. So he had we'll be discussing dreams too, but he had a dream and he's like, I need to get that Seal Book. He's like, I really have I had a dream about it and I need to get that. So I connected him with the same person who had sent me a copy of that record, and we got it over to him. And what I told him, I says, I have a hard time with that book because there's certain things, the way it's written, I just don't understand it. I'm reading the same thing over and over and over, trying to understand it, and it's not coming through. I don't think I'm understanding the meaning or getting the right intention that it had. And so, anyways, what he did, no understanding how this was translated from Portuguese and then back to English, he actually took it and reverse translated it. He reverse translated it from the English version that we'd gotten back to Portuguese, then translated it from Portuguese to a different intermediary language, and then translated it from that intermediary language back to English. And what resulted was something that made a lot more sense. So here we have the original English version that had been translated straight from Portuguese to English. And then after he translated it back to Portuguese, back to the intermediary language, and then back to English, we have the version on the right, which makes a lot more sense. So you can go ahead and screenshot this. But if I read the one on the left, I'm like constantly thinking, I don't have the complete understanding here. I think I kind of know what he's talking about, but I'm not completely sure. And if I read the version on the right, it's making a lot more sense to me, much more understanding. But it's what I think would be something that if the original translation had been from Portuguese into English by someone who understood both Portuguese and English, I think this would have been something that could have been rectified and prevented. So just so you know that that's out there, translations from one language to another, and also the problems that can occur and arise in how that's done if it's not done well. Then we have the first accounts. So there's first account or eyewitness journalistic points of view. So the disciples are a great example of all that. They're mostly in the New Testament. There's other first accounts in all of the other records that are out there. But I'm just going to give you an idea of, what to look at or what things look like when they are first accounts. But they're some of the most accurate because they're just writing what they see, what they saw. Now, if they have any errors in understanding, of course, that's going to be an error in what's written. As far as we can't necessarily take everything true and correct. If there's something that was believed that isn't true, well, it gets written down as scripture, and then we start quoting it years later, when we're really quoting something that's slightly in error or not complete. The third method that we have by which records come to us is channeling or going upon the way. Now, the term channeling, even for me, it brings kind of this negative connotation with it. Um, but as I've understood and learned what channeling is over the years and learned going upon the way and how this is, I have to tell you, this is probably one of the most accurate ways that we can receive a record. If that person completely understands everything and is open to change and different ideas. Like, we can't be stuck in our box. We have to be able to be outside of the box and, like, okay, just show me the way it is, and I don't care if it interferes with my past way or my past thinking or my past understanding. I want to know how things are. Now, most of the books in the Old Testament actually come to us through channeling. This is, prophets, they would channel, they would go on the way, and they're the ones that walked and talked with God. They got the answers directly from Him, got these things, and then they came back and wrote them down. So, you might be a little bit of an aversion to the idea of channeling, but when you realize this is how all the prophets did it, maybe some of that will cut away. But there's many scriptures, that have records, not records, but examples of people going on the way and communicating directly with God, just from the Old Testament. These are just the people that we know walked and talked with God. We got Adam and Eve, we got Enoch, we got Noah and Moses. And then over from the Book of Mormon side, we've got Lehi, Nephi, the brother of Jared, who's also his name was also Morhanrai Moriankamer. And so we've got those records of people that walked and talked with God. These are people who channeled Him, who went upon the way, who saw Him directly. Then in this Ayat Kuyat Nemenha record, this is a record, some Indian people who walked on the way with them. Everyone, everyone. Like, I wrote that down so many times because I really want you to understand. Like, everybody in this community learned how to go on the way. They learned how to talk to God directly. So they were communicating with Him directly. They were all channeling. They were all going on the way. They all did this. And this is what was meant for us. This is meant for everybody. And this is something that's been lost. I think that's the main reason that this information is coming back to us today, is so that we know, like, hey, this is supposed to happen. We're supposed to be able to do this. And once you look at this, when I first started reading the Ayat Kuyat Nemenha, it was about 2.5, 3 years later where I finally learned how to go on the way, and then kind of figured out, oh, you know what, I kind of already been doing this, but didn't take it to the next level. And so anyways, we'll be discussing some of that. I've created a podcast series, Going Upon the Way, what it is. There's 4 parts in that series. We discuss all the biblical examples in the first part, discuss how it's done, what needs to be done. There's actually a training program for it. We have the words for that, so we kind of understand how to facilitate that, and a lot of that's in the record that I was just speaking of, the Ayat Kuyat Nemenha. But we want you to learn how to go on the way. So there's a podcast series for that. Sometimes the way, it was referred to as the way, in the way, on the way, upon the way walking upon the way, crossing over. But this was channeling, this was revelation, this was all of those things. This was how they did it. And I'm creating another series too about going on the way, how to do it, where I'm going to teach you how to do it. Like I say, it took me 2.5, 3 years to figure out how to do this. And now that we've learned, we're teaching our son, we're teaching other people, and I want this information to be out there. Everybody's supposed to be doing this. Supposed to be going on the way and talking with, Heavenly Father, Heavenly Mother, Jesus Christ, getting all this information. This is out there for us. So, there was another book, the same book that we had talked about. Now you'll understand a little bit more about it. It was channeled into Portuguese, and it was, this is the way that it was done. Basically, they went on the way and got the information and then put that down into Portuguese, and then of course it was, translated a different way into English. There is a way that we get records through Urim and Thummim. This is another translation technique. So we either have a tablet of plates from language that we don't speak, or we might have um, an actual tablet with a like inscription or a carving, an image that's been carved into it. And then you have this Urim and Thummim that's used to read that and tell the story, and how that does it. The Urim, those are the glasses that you look through, and they function kind of like VR glasses is the best I can give an analogy for it. And the wearer, the Urim, the Thummim part is just a breastplate, and it's there to support the glasses. So instead of the glasses hanging off your ear, they basically hang off your chest by this Thummim. And here's a picture of kind of how that's used. Um, Obviously, a different one, or maybe just an example. But you look through the glasses at what you're reading, and it shows you what you need to be seeing. Sometimes you can be seeing word translations, or you can be seeing a story. You can actually have it work like a. That's why I call it VR glasses, is the where it can see a story unfold instead of reading about Adam and Eve. He can watch Adam and Eve as he's looking through these glasses, almost as though he was there. So we have a record that has come to us, and the record that we have, the Book of Mormon, that wasn't really translated through Urim and Thummim. That was done in a different way, but it had started out intentionally to be translated in Urim and Thummim. The first 116 pages, which is called the Book of Lehi, we do not have that book. That book has been lost, either lost or stolen, and it was not retranslated. Um, so the Book of Mormon starts with the record of Lehi's son, who tells us a lot of things that his father did, or kind of recounts all that. So we have some information, but we've lost that whole book that was actually translated through Urim and Thummim. And when that book was taken away, the Urim and Thummim God also took that away. So the second part of the Book of Mormon is not translated in that manner. What's important to know is, like, if you're misinterpreting what's being seen, you can change the story. So if there are groups that have Urim and Thummim, and there are translating things today, but if you misunderstand what you're seeing, you can mess the story up. God also told us that, you know, because we asked, like, hey, why are there some errors in here? And he told us, well, if you have only one person reading the story or looking through Urim and Thummim and writing that down, there's a possibility that story being misinterpreted. Is where if you have three people, he told us he wanted to have three people do it, that would have corrected the errors. It would have eliminated them. To try to get three understandings, you'd have a better, true understanding of what was going on. So it should be used by three or more individuals to confirm the meaning of it. The group that I'm talking about specifically, they've released 5 books of remembrance. The Book of Achi, which is the brother of Jared, the Book of Enoch, the Ancient Grandmothers, Melchizedek, and the Book of Moses. And all 5 of these, all 5 of these came through Urim and Thummim, but they came through one person using the Urim. And so there can be some errors. There's a great amount of information in there. I highly recommend reading these books. We'll talk about them more. Like I say, each one will even have its own video. But But when he was able to look through that, he sees the story unfolding. He saw Adam and Eve. He saw Enoch. He saw, Melchizedek. He saw all this stuff. He saw these things, and he just simply has, three people there to help write down everything. He's saying out loud what he's seeing and interpreting for them what he's seeing. He's got three interpreters writing down, so that they don't try to miss anything that was being said. But it would have been helpful if then, after he had done his account, another person had sat down, looked through Urim, and accounted the same thing, and then the third person had accounted the same thing, all separately, and then matched up the stories together. That would have given us a much better understanding of what was there. And also, there's a small. I'll go back to that. Also, there's a small misunderstanding in that he was offered the ability to look through Urim and see the world from the very beginning to the end, and he chose not to. For whatever reason, that was something that he had chosen. But there would be a much better understanding of the beginning and the end if he had been willing to look and see how that all started. So now we have other records that are telling us about the beginning and the end, but they're not coming from this group. And another translation method. So when Joseph Smith lost the Urim and Thummim and the 116 pages that was what was translated through the Urim and Thummim, he continued translation, but this time through seer stones. And so these are stones that were put in a hat, and he'd look into that. Oh, that Daniel 6 at the bottom is not supposed to be there. That's just an error and copy on the slide. And so he'd look through the hat and be able to see the words, and then somebody would record down the words, and that's how that was happening. Now, if you notice in the picture, the Book of Mormon is covered up, or the plates, the actual plates themselves that he was supposedly translated are covered up. They don't even need to be read themselves. He's looking through stones and getting the words. So quite a different way of having that come forth. For whoever doesn't kind of want to acknowledge that the Book of Mormon is a true record, you're going to have a hard time with that, taking that stance for the rest of the time here, because all of the Indian records, the Native American records, they testify of this record as well. So they've got people in their cities with the same names, the same histories. We know where they came from. So to kind of go on that route saying, well, that's not a true record because of, Joseph Smith or whatever, or how it was translated, however reason you want to discount that book, just take another thought at that. You really need to use the Spirit to tell you whether it's true or not. But we have a great number of records that are testifying that this record is true. They know where these people came from. They know where they lived. They know where they landed, which was in, the southern area of Mexico, and they'll go over all that in their records. There's also translation through focusing or concentrating. So there's a record called the Ang Ocklaton, which is the Philippine record, and it was written on copper plates. These aren't the copper plates, but these are copper plates to give you an idea of just what it would look like and whatnot. And if they're written in a language that you don't speak, it's pretty hard to translate that. Well, the person that translated the Ocklaton, God came to them. Actually, it wasn't God, but it was one of the persons that had originally lived in that time period, came back to him and taught him how to read the language. And he said, okay, so you can translate this word. This word means this, or this symbol means this. This symbol means this. This symbol means this, and you can translate it word for word like that, or you can look at the word, concentrate on that image, and write down the first thing that comes to your mind, and this will be the same thing as translating it. So you don't have to translate it word for word. You can translate it through focusing and concentrating. So that's the method that the Ang Ocklaton came to us. And before you start thinking, wow, we got, how's this translation going or focusing or concentrating. Well, I want to tell you a little story about my aunt. So my aunt Evelyn, she was living in California, but she went out to visit her daughter in Hawaii, and she found a vendor selling oysters that had already had cultured pearls inside. So at some point they had, opened the pearl up, thrown in this little ingot or whatever plastic thing, and then the pearl will go ahead and make the oyster on the outside surface of that. Well, my aunt Evelyn, she went up to the guy who was selling me. She says, "I'd like to buy two similarly sized black pearls around, 6, 7 millimeters in diameter. I want to make them into earrings." And the guy kind of looked at her and smiled. And he's like, because she wanted to know, like, hey, how do I tell which ones are going to have black pearl? Or is there some way of looking at the outside of the oyster and being able to determine what color is going to be made on the inside? Or is there a way for me to tell what size of the ball that had been inserted into the pearl at the start of all this? And he said, no, they don't record what kind of ball that they're in. You just, pick the ones out of the box. The boxes got water in them because they're still alive. But you pick the ones that you want, and we'll go ahead and open them for you. But he says only about 5% of the pearls are black pearls, so you're looking at about 1 in 20. And if you want two of them, then you got another 1 in 20. So anyway, she wanted to get two of these, the same size, both black, so against all the odds. And she does this thing called muscle testing, which is a little bit, it's not quite the same thing as focusing or concentrating, but she just muscle tests. And, she spent an hour or two out there and going down the rows and sorting through everything and, picking one up here, picking one up there. And she finally comes back and she's got two oysters, and she says, I want these two. And they opened them up, and they found two black pearls, each about 6.5 millimeters, that were just almost exactly the same size. And the guy was looking at her, he's like, how in the world did this just happen? Well, so just so you know, things can happen without us having to understand it. But she was able to do that. So think about that. The last two methods, there's, one of these is dreams. And dreams happen when we're asleep. God communicates to us through dreams. It can be a powerful way for him to reveal things to us. But there's two things we have to do. We have to have the dream, and then we have to understand the dream, like what the dream means. So we have people that know they're dreamers, like my friend Zachary, and then we have people that don't think they dream or dream very infrequently. So far at this point, I haven't had anything that I would call a dream that would qualify for a way that God is revealing things to me. But at any point in the future, that could change for us. That could change for all of us. So that is a method, and we've had quite a few records come to us where things have come through dreams. Again, dreams happen while we're asleep. So Joseph, the son of Jacob, the guy who had the coat of many colors, he had two prophetic dreams. In the first dream, he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain, which is kind of like a bushel. And you probably already know these stories, but Joseph's bushel stood upright, and his brother's bushels bowed down to his, and that can be found in Genesis 37:5-8. Then he had another dream later on. He dreamed that the sun, moon, and 11 stars, which represented his father, his mother, and 11 brothers, they all bowed down to him. And that's a little bit further on in the story, Genesis 37:9-10. So, and that can all be found in the Old Testament. Well, there's also records of people with dreams in the New Testament. Joseph, the father of Jesus, he received guidance through 4 specific dreams. And the first dream that he had, he was told that Mary would have a child by the Spirit and that he should take her to wife. You got Matthew 1:20 there. Later on, after Christ's birth, he had another dream, and he was told to flee to Egypt with Mary and Jesus. And that can be found in Matthew 2:13. Then in a third dream that he had, God told him when it was safe to return to Israel. And then you got Matthew, 2:19 to 20. And then his last dream, when he was going, leaving Egypt and going back home, he was told to avoid Judea, stay away from that area. They eventually settled in Nazareth, as you know. So, as Jesus became known as Jesus of Nazareth, but that story can be found in 2:22. And so, we've got examples from the Bible. We've got the Old Testament, the New Testament. We've also got examples from the Book of Mormon. Lehi, the one whose book we lost, we know about three of his dreams because his son Nephi recorded information about them. Lehi was one of 8 prophets living in the city of Jerusalem. This was before Jerusalem was destroyed, and God communicated to him through his dreams. And the first dream that he had, or the first dream that Nephi, his son, tells us about, was when he was told to leave Jerusalem, that Jerusalem was to be destroyed. So you can find that dream. Then he had another dream where he was told to send his sons back to Jerusalem to retrieve the brass plates, which was their spiritual record, and to not, leave before that had been done. Then he has a third dream that his son tells us about, where he's talking about the tree of life, the path of the iron rod that led to it, and the distractions along the way, including the great and spacious buildings. So that's, a third dream that he have. Did he have more? Probably. We don't know because, obviously that record's been lost, been mistranslated, whatever. So we don't have the actual record of Lehi, but we do have record of this having happened. Um, so when you got dreams and visions, I want you to remember this. Peter quoted Joel, and he was talking about the last days, and the Lord says, I will pour my spirit upon all the people. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those last days, and they will prophesy. So expect to be seeing a lot more of this prophesying as time goes on. Expect to see a lot more of these dreams, a lot more of these visions. Um, these are these are supposed to be coming to us in these last days. This is something that we have been forewarned. Joel told us about it in the Old Testament, and you can see the references there on the left side. And then Peter quoted it in Acts, that same verse in the New Testament. But these are all things that are coming at this point. Now, what makes different the visions from dreams? In visions, you're awake, whereas dreams were asleep. But visions, they're similar to the person, except you're awake. Um, I've had 3 visions that I was able to identify as visions. For me, they come as an image along with a short message, and they're unmistakable when you get them. Now, ironically, I had the first one in about 2006, and guess what? I ignored it, thinking it was an error. um, I didn't think that could be, and I didn't pay much attention to it. It took me another, well, probably 8, 9 years to recognize that what I had seen, that it was actually truly a vision. Um, so the vision that I had, I saw my son about 8 years before he was born. The image that flashed into my mind was that of a young Haley Joel Osment, the actor. Um, I saw my son in this vision. He was about 10 to 12, probably closer to 11 to 12. And I remember thinking, wow, that looks like Haley Joel Osment, but he's got brown eyes and a rounder face. And that was the image that came to me. And I'll never forget that image. Um, it was about a year. My son was about a year old. Again, this was about 8 years after having the image that was in my mind, after having the vision. And I looked at him and I'm like, I recognize what's going on. And the reason I had kind of ignored that vision in the beginning is because I've got black hair, and my son, the image I saw of my son, he had brown hair or lightish brown hair. And I didn't think that could be possible. So I just kind of wrote it off. But now as I look at him and the older I get, it's been kind of fun to have had this because as he gets older, I see more and more and more of all of it. And when I saw that image, when it was flashed to me, the message that came with was, "This is your son." And so now I look back and we're not quite at the age that I saw him at. My son in this picture, he's probably about 9. And like I say, I think the image that I saw, he was about 11 to 12. He's not quite there yet. Um, he just turned 11, but so he's getting pretty close. But when I look at them, I'm like, okay, yeah, if I was going to describe to somebody who's never seen my son over the phone and wanted them to know what he looked like, and I couldn't send a picture or whatnot, I would say, well, do you know the actor Haley Joel Osment? Because he kind of looks like him, but he's got brown eyes and a slightly rounder face. That's how I would describe him. That's still how he looks to me. So, anyways, in the visions, we are awake. Um, there's lots of examples of people having visions. The visions are huge. So don't think that they're rare. You may have already had some. And again, if you're like me, take note when you see those things. When you see something flash into your mind and you see a meaning or a statement or some description or words or warning or whatever that comes with it, pay attention to that. But Abraham had visions. He had a vision to reassure him of the covenant. Moses had a vision. Jacob had a vision. He saw a ladder to heaven. Isaiah had vision. Ezekiel had many visions, including one of the valley of dry bones. Daniel had visions. He saw the four beasts. So Daniel, gave us also the book of Ezra. Actually, Ezra comes from Daniel's cousin. Excuse me. But Daniel saw the four beasts, wrote about it in the last days. So that's like Old Testament revelations. And so this was something that was conferred to him through a vision. Then Daniel's brother or cousin, I think it was cousin, he has the book of Ezra, and Ezra's been removed from the Bible. We only have one of them in the Bible. The other one's been removed, but the other one is in the Apocrypha, and it has further information about these beasts. And he too had been given visions about what these were. So as we record for those and we read through those, a lot of those have information for the last days. But we have to understand we're reading a vision. And Zechariah, he also had 8 complex visions just in one night alone. So there's quite a bit of people that have had visions. We also have records of visions coming from people in the New Testament. So Cornelius saw an angel leading him to Peter. Peter had had a vision of unclean foods, teaching him about the Gentiles. Paul had several visions, including the Macedonian call and a glimpse of the third heaven. So he wrote about all those. These are things that we know about because they've written about them, but how did they get them initially? They got them through visions. And then probably the biggest one that you may or may not realize comes from a vision is the entire book of Revelation written by John came to him as a vision while on Patmos, the island of Patmos. So visions are quite common, and we should expect to see them more and more. Um, there's more visions that have been recorded in the Book of Mormon for those that have already know about this book. So Nephi had many visions. This is also how Nephi was shown what his father had seen. He wanted to see his father's dreams. Well, he was awake and God allowed him to see those dreams. So he was seeing those dreams in visions. So this is how he saw this. He also was shown the history of the world. He saw the birth of Christ. He saw the death of Christ. He saw the resurrection of Christ. He also saw the colonization of America by white men later on. Again, they're living in the Americas, but it's uninhabited by white people at that time, or not white people. I mean, they did come over and they were they were white people, but it's uninhabited by um, pilgrims. We're looking at 1400 years, not 1400 years, because this was back in it's like 600 BC. So we're looking at like 22, 2300 years before the 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 pilgrims would come over and before this colonization would take place. But he saw this in a vision. He saw that it would happen. So those are the records or the methods by which we receive a lot of these records. And I kind of want you to know about that because as I'm going to be discussing the records, I'll discuss how they came forth. And rather than having to discuss it in each different one, I want you to kind of understand, okay, and this one came this method, and this one came this method, and this one came this method. It'll make more sense. Um, these are the books that we're going to be going over. All of the books here, are coming from other people, other lands. Um, and like everybody, this is actually what I would call my queue. These are books I want to read, haven't gotten to, but they're on the list. Sometimes it seems like they keep getting bumped down the list further and further. There's things I want to read, and I'm like, okay, that one's next. Okay, that one's next, and these just kind of keep bunching up. And unfortunately, we don't have the way to just download a record straight into our minds. I would love that because there's a lot of books here. Um, Again, I'll be going over all of the records that the Midewen have released, all these things that have come to us through the Indians, the Native Americans. There's other records that, if you asked me 10 years ago, I wouldn't have considered these sacred and spiritual records. But if you ask me today, knowing what I know now, and a lot of these records, like these are spiritual records, these are sacred records. No, they didn't come to us the way that we normally think. They're not stuck in the Bible. They're not, they've come to us in other manners, but this is teaching us about truth, even back before the beginning of Adam and Eve. A lot of the information that comes through these, how it all works together. I'll be going over the works of Dolores Cannon, where we started, what books to read maybe might work out reading first. I truly believe that we're all led to an order. When I look back and I think like, okay, we read that book first, we read that book second. And most of the time, they're exactly the same order that I would recommend somebody to read them in. God has this way of doing that. He has this way of putting the very next thing in front of you to give you a stepping stone to the one after that. And you look back and you're like, well, that was a perfect sequence for me because that's the way he guides you. And the sequence that we have and that we've been going through the records is might be different from the sequence that for you. And I can encourage you to, always use the spirit, always use whatever guidance you have. If you feel like some book's next for you, go by all means, go ahead and read it. I'm just going to be here to tell you a little bit about each book, a little bit about each record, and then later on for those that don't want to read, I'll try to be giving you all the good, the meat and the potatoes out of each record. Then there's also books that have been kind of inspired by Dolores Cannon, records that have taken what she had come to and the knowledge and understanding that she had, and then kind of took it to the next level and got more. So there's a lot of things that we come to about the Anna, the grandmother of Jesus, that comes through um, Claire Hartstrong, and then we've got Stuart Wilson and Johanna Prentice on the left side there that have you know given us more information on certain cities, certain civilizations, certain things that did exist that we don't recall. You'll notice that one of those is Atlantis. One of the books from Dolores Cannon herself was about the city of Atlantis as well. How does all that fit in? Well, it kind of fits in the same way that how do we have a 300,000-year-old human remains if the actual start of Earth was 6,000 years ago with Adam and Eve? Because that wasn't the only time that it's had a beginning. We've had other beginnings. We've had other things going on. And when you start to read these records, all this stuff starts to make sense. truly the questions about how the earth started, all of this, what we're here, what we're doing, it all starts to make sense when you get the full picture. So these people are bringing us the full picture. There's additional books from Dolores Cannon. Then there's Gabrielle. Gabrielle is kind of like the modern day Isaiah. Um, wow, her the information that she had is just so far out above and beyond, telling us how this all works together and whatnot. Truly incredible. She has an entire library over in Germany. She has her own publishing house, and if you order books directly from them, they're cheaper than if you order them on Amazon or whatnot. So the best place to go is to order straight from them. She has quite a few books. There's actually 4 pages of records here and an entire series dedicated to young adults and kids and whatnot. So that's kind of what we'll be doing is going over all those things. And this is part A. Part B, I'm going to be doing a little bit more information, and then in part C, D, E, F, G, we'll be going over where these records come from, how they are, a little bit about each one, so maybe you can decide where you want to start in your journey. Once again, this has been an episode from Truth Shall Come Forth. Please like, subscribe, and share the channel. Hope you have a great day and enjoy your progress through all this.